Psychedelics Today here, recording on November 4, 2016. Kyle and Joe at Rossouw with, what is the name of your company?
Indeeva. So it's like a portmanteau of indica and sativa.
That sounds perfect. Biomedical. So you're out of Montreal, which is a beautiful city. I'm kind of jealous that you get to spend so much time there. And what do you think of the city? Beautiful?
Yeah, it's a really beautiful city. It's the first time I've lived in a city, so it's a new experience to me. But it has a special kind of energy, man. It really feels like a crossing point or an intersection of many cultures and ideas and stuff. And especially in the summer, it becomes really alive. You know, with a lot of festivals and there's just a lot of things happening all the time. Really beautiful people, man. You know, I'm really blessed to have met an amazing group of friends here that are all kind of on a similar path and trajectory as I am and you guys are too, and looking ahead to the future.
So we connected years ago on a podcast I was doing called Permaculture Salad, and we were talking about ayahuasca, permaculture, shamanism, all sorts of stuff like that. And you moved to Canada from Peru and jumped into some graduate work, studying tropical plants or a specific tropical plant?
No, it wasn't quite tropical plants. It was, my master's degree was in plant science. I actually was kind of the opposite. It really had to focus on what's the idea is called cubic farming. So the idea is like to, grow more food, very technologically intensive within cities to kind of reduce the whole, the conundrum regarding exorbitant transportation. For instance, our lettuce here mostly comes from Mexico and stuff like that. And then people are thinking, why don't we use LED lights, which are supposed to be much more energy efficient, and utilize building spaces that aren't occupied to cultivate locally. It's a beautiful idea, and I learned a lot. Definitely, just through a graduate program teaches you more than anything, not about specific content, but really just how to do research, how to think about something, how to write, how to design and stuff like that. But I guess in the end of the day, I got a little bit disillusioned because what we're basically growing is lettuce and basil. And if we're saying like, we're going to start a food revolution and feed the world this way, then you have to tell yourself, well, people don't really sustain themselves with lettuce and basil. They're going to want wheat and potatoes and corn. And that's still very, very far away from growing acreages of, staple crops inside buildings. So it's a nice adjuvant. It could certainly, make a dent in the energy consumption of producing food, but cannot be the sole solution in my mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a super complicated subject, but we are here to talk about drugs.
Yeah.
So let's see.
It was kind of. Sorry.
So you at some point started this company, Indeeva, to develop products, new types of products to target specific diseases. So you give us a general overview of what you guys are trying to do.
So basically, the crux of our company is utilizing technologies that are already inherent within mostly the pharmaceutical industry. And, when I say the pharmaceutical industry, it immediately, lights up red flags of big pharma. And, certainly that is a whole can of worms that I don't really want to open right now. But yeah, that healthcare system is, or if it's, I like a lot of people say it's not a healthcare system, but it's like a symptom or a disease management system, which it surely definitely looks like it is. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily do the best thing to support the overall health of the collective. Yet a lot of the technologies that are inherent in it, with regards to purification, standardization, quality assurance, formulation, and delivery methods, especially delivery methods, are very useful. And cannabis, due to the prohibition of the past few decades, we've not really been able to utilize these technologies within cannabis. But now, fortunately, Canada has really, I feel like we're probably, in some regards at least, leading the way right now as far as medicinal cannabis is concerned. And it's allowing us the opportunity to bring in, because of the unshackling of the legal restrictions, people are willing to bring enough capital in right now so that we can actually start doing these kind of things. So our whole idea is to utilize these technologies and basically develop novel delivery methods and unique formulations that are, basically looking at still using whole plant extracts as the foundation, but then adjusting the major cannabinoid ratios to target specific diseases, specific conditions. Cannabis is like typically touted as some panacea or silver bullet. And so it's like, smoke a joint and here's these 40 symptoms. If you have any one of them, it could probably cure that. I don't want to dispute that. Cannabis is, of course, I'm dedicating my life towards starting a business based on the cannabis plant. So I have incredible admiration for its therapeutic prowess. And it is probably the most medicinally diverse plant that there is. Yet instead of using such a quote unquote gross route of delivery as smoking, as pulmonary application, to kind of take care of all these different conditions, why don't we create novel or unique pharmacokinetic profiles? In other words, if we look at blood plasma concentration over time, smoking is kind of like IV administration. Like you can have a giant spike in your blood plasma concentration, and then like the body does, it compensates by drastically reducing that. So that's not necessarily the ideal thing for a lot of diseases. It's really good, actually, if you want to do something like, take care of nausea, because I'm nauseous. I want to take care of this nausea right now, and it doesn't need to be sustained. So I smoke a joint and it takes care of my nausea. But when you're dealing with something like chronic pain, which is, as the name implies, chronic, it's a background noise of pain that's pretty much there all the time, then actually that's a very non-ideal blood plasma profile. So if you use something like, for instance, a transdermal patch or something that can just slowly release a little bit of cannabinoids in the bloodstream over a prolonged period, then that pharmacokinetic profile would much better match the actual conditions that you're trying to address. And so that is actually the first, that's the broader vision of the company, utilizing pharmaceutical technologies, honing cannabis towards specific conditions. But I kind of just alluded to what our first big project is that we've been working on for about a year, and will probably keep us busy for another year or so, is developing a novel transdermal patch specifically with cannabinoids. And really it can certainly be applied to a lot of different conditions, but the main idea is to really optimize it for people with chronic pain or specifically neuropathic pain.
That's really cool. I think that's a smart way to go about it. Living in Colorado, I see it all the time. It's just praising the plant and having not too much specific stuff to say, like, this study here says XYZ, when it's really just really general statements that I think have been around for decades.
Yeah.
Novel approaches to applications
there certainly exists research. There's not a dearth, because it's that whole catch-22 for many decades was that the FDA said, well, we're not going to take it out of Schedule 1 because there's no scientific evidence that shows it has any medicinal qualities. And then as soon as you want to do a study to show it has medicinal qualities, then they say, oh, but it's Schedule 1. So they're going to have to jump through untold number of loopholes, so effectively making it not able for people to really perform any research. So we've been able to slowly accrue various lines of research, and I feel like now a big thing, man, that's changed the whole landscape, and we just led to the legalization of cannabis has actually just been the internet and allowing all these people that kind of had to hide and all these little different lines of research to finally just coalesce and see that, though nobody has really done, if we have to measure it in terms of the standards that regular pharmaceutical drugs are held to, the phase 1 to 4, the placebo, double-blind, controlled crossover studies with hundreds, if not thousands of people. We haven't really done that. We haven't emulated that, the quote-unquote gold standard, but taking into account all this research together with anecdotal evidence, which stretches back literally thousands of years. The first medicinal reference to cannabis was in China about 3,000 years ago. Then it definitely gives us more than enough material to take it serious and really, unburden ourselves by regulations and fear to start, treating it with the same scientific respect that we've treated other medicines.
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because in the psychedelic realm, they're researching psilocybin and MDMA, and it doesn't seem like, even though they're Scheduled I substances, they're able to research it. And it seems with cannabis, it's like, no, we can't do that. It's just a really interesting dilemma that we're facing.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's certainly the same for psychedelics. Both of them have suffered because of the scheduling, and of course. And, people will think like this is a conspiracy, but it's really just plain, capitalism and the system that we live in. Right now, to bring a new drug from conception to market will cost a company about, there's different estimates, but the most recent one is from Tufts University, and they said it costs about $2.7 billion. So for a company willing to invest, and the main cost of that is the phase 3 clinical trials, because doing experiments on hundreds, if not thousands, of people costs a lot of fucking money, man. So to recuperate those costs, obviously you need a patent, 20-year patent, and if you're not incentivized, if you're not able to have a patent on something like cannabis or psychedelics, then there's no real reason for that economic money, for that muscle, to back something like psychedelics or cannabis. So thank God for people like MAPS and Hefter, and I know there's one more, that saw that, okay, if companies aren't going to do it, how about the power of the collective? Harnessing something like crowdfunding and saying, hey, do you believe in this idea? We sure do. You want to make the world a better place? Help us fund this. And, that's what's driving that. And you can even go a little bit further and say, not only are the pharmaceutical companies not incentivized, they're actually kind of disincentivized, because when you have these novel medicines like cannabis and psychedelics that are incredibly powerful and effective for a broad range of symptoms between all of them, that's definitely going to eat into the profit margins of the pharmaceutical industry, and they don't want to do it. And hence, for instance, Insys Therapeutics, which are a producer of fentanyl, spending $500,000 recently to oppose legalization in Arizona. They say, quote unquote, it's to protect the children. And if by children they mean their profit margins, then I think they are being honest, but come on, please, who are you fooling? It's business,
Yeah, that's interesting. I have recently had fentanyl, and we actually got to talk right before I had surgery. And we talked a little bit about how I could decrease the amount of opiates I would need to use in the pain management. And fortunately, actually really wasn't all that painful, just once in a while. It was like one application of pain relievers a day, 5 milligram dose of opiates. And then I would have some kind of CBD heavy lozenges, and that was kind of nice too. I think us talking about that really helped make that kind of a big deal. And fentanyl, I was a little nervous about, because 500. So what's the number?
It's 100 times stronger than morphine, But what that really just means is you take 100 times less. If
Hopefully.
It's produced by a pharmaceutical industry, it's just more potent. The real scary part is once you start dealing, with an illicit fentanyl market, where people can easily just scrape off more than they were supposed to. And then, that can obviously lead to very dangerous, suppression of the respiratory system, which will lead to overdose death,
Right. So this is kind of the subject that we were interested in talking to you about. The medical marijuana market somehow impacting or decreasing rates of addiction from prescription opiate use. You had some really interesting things to say about it last time we spoke.
For sure. This has been kind of my academic interest, I would say, more than academic actually, for the past few months. So I've researched this quite intensively. There's a lot of papers that exist since the 70s. This is going to take me a while to kind of, share this whole message. Because there's so many different lines, actually. It's going to seem quite ridiculous after a while. And as I shared with the guys, I also just tapped into a whole new vein of how cannabidiol is also really implicated in reducing cravings from morphine and heroin withdrawal. But the main thing, though, is, and this, of course, intersects beautifully, too, with the whole neuropathic pain thing, because opiates derivatives from Papaver somniferum, the opium poppy, whether it is heroin or morphine or hydrocodone or hydromorphone or oxycodone or fentanyl, all these things are incredibly effective analgesics when used in the right context. Now, the right context for opiates usually are, acute pain. So, hey, I just got in a car accident and I broke a lot of bones. I wake up in the hospital. Yeah, it's really nice to have opiates in, man. Really nice. And the other thing that it seems to also be really good for is kind of what's known as palliative care, which are people that are in terminal stages of cancer. And, cancer is apparently an incredibly painful experience to go through because your body is literally withering away, So for these two applications, it works really well. And for the longest time, these were kind of what we restricted their usage for. Chronic pain is a huge problem. There are many, many people that suffer from it. Many more than, say, at any moment, people that suffer from acute pain or cancer pain. And I feel kind of probably what happened was in the 90s, some people in the big pharmaceutical industry, specifically, I'm going to just, out them because there's so much information about none of this that I'm saying is woo. This is completely proven. In fact, there was a court case in which they even admitted this. But Purdue Pharma, which is the producers of OxyContin, basically decided in the 90s that they were going to cease on this 1979 small letter to a journal where I think the paper is called Jick and Porter. And that letter basically said that we used opiates on this amount of people and less than 1% of them got addicted. So then I decided to basically say, hey, where we have this opiophobia thing going on. We're way too scared to treat people with opiates. And there are a lot of people with chronic pain. Chronic pain is really under-addressed. It's not taken care of therapeutically well at all. So let's drop the opiophobia and let's start prescribing kind of OxyContin, which was, of course, their baby, which is based on oxycodone. Let's start using this now for chronic pain. And slowly through a systematic, genius, I would say it was genius marketing, really, because they told people like, less than 1% of people get addicted. It's very effective for chronic pain. You can use it indefinitely. So a person with chronic pain, again, by definition, has indefinite pain. Before, doctors would say, well, I don't want to give you opiates because, man, you're going to get addicted to this stuff if you use it for a very long time. Now they were saying, actually, very few people get addicted. And it's mostly, they definitely alluded again to like the fiend or the drug type person. But average Joe or Sally, the lawyer or the doctor or the congressman, they'll never get addicted to opiates. And so they marketed it very aggressively, increased their pharmaceutical reps, incentivized them with absurd bonuses. And I know some people were paid hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, just, sales reps for, making their targets. And slowly America became pretty much a nation addicted on opiates. It's strange. I certainly think if we had to go by numbers, it's hard to measure that. We have to decide what metric you're going to use. But if you're going to use the metric of how many people die of overdoses and how many people go to treatment facilities seeking admission for addiction to a specific substance, then it's unprecedented, really, right now, addiction to legal opiate painkillers. In 2002, there were more people dying from opiate painkillers than any street drug. Right now, it's more than all street drugs combined. And so it's about 1 person every 15 to 20 minutes dies of a legal opiate overdose in the States. And then it actually also became in 2008, more people died from it than car crashes, motor vehicle fatalities, which was the first time ever that motor vehicles weren't the number one source of preventable deaths in the United States. And then you're talking about death, and, I think we all kind of grew up with pop culture and movies like Requiem for a Dream and Basketball Diaries that, perhaps over-dramatized it somewhat, but definitely being caught in kind of the cyclical quagmire of opiate addiction is a really, really hard thing to beat, man, because it restructures the brain, and it's something that a person pretty much will have to keep his checks on for his whole life. Now, how this connects with cannabis is cannabis, and I just want to say right off the front that a lot of my ideas, or what really turned me on to this initially, was a very excellent lecture series called Cannabis as a Potential Partial Solution to the Opiate Epidemic by a physician called Dr. Dustin Sulak, who is based in Maine, which are one of the states that are most hard hit by the opiate epidemic. And it was basically that there are a number of ways in which cannabis can really tomorrow help drastically reduce the numbers of opiates that are prescribed. And the main reason is that the most famous primary cannabinoid in cannabis, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, has an incredible synergistic effect with opiates. It's called the potentiation effect. And basically just what it means is if you take THC with an opiate, you can use much less of that opiate to get the exact same analgesic effect. And the interesting thing is it's not a trivial potentiation. The numbers, again, unfortunately, there's a lack really of human research. Most of it's been done on rats because that's what people have been able to do because of what we've just discussed a little earlier. But most of it shows that it's, anywhere between like 4 times to 10 times. Some of it, I know codeine was the most. I think, it showed you can use 4%. This is just if anyone wants to look this up, this is work that was done by Dr. Sandra Welch. I think she's in Virginia or North Carolina, South Carolina, but Dr. Sandra Welch. And it showed that you can use 25 times less codeine. So in other words, if you use 4% of the codeine you would use, you would get the exact same analgesic effect if you co-administered it with a sub-psychoactive amount of THC. In other words, it's an amount of THC that if you had to take it by itself, wouldn't even get you high. You wouldn't even notice it. So, of course, the implication thereof is that if people were given THC along with their opiates, they could be given much less, which could just at least kind of now, start closing the floodgates of the amount of opiates that are being dispensed, the rate of opiates being dispensed in the US at present. Yeah, so that's the main, the main thing. There are definitely a number of other beneficial, as a plant scientist and a person that's obsessed with compounds from plants, I don't want to really stick my neck out there and say that out of all synergistic interactions, of all plants that interact with one another, I've not really seen as strong interaction between any plants as the opium poppy and cannabis. It's really, really quite remarkable how they seem to, synergize with one another. Then, as we all know, the other main compound of the other most well-known primary cannabinoid is cannabidiol, CBD, which has become quite famous of late. It's a super interesting compound pharmacologically because it doesn't actually even bind to the allosteric sites of the CB1 or CB2 receptor, but it binds to the orthosteric sites. So what it actually does is it still leaves the binding site of the CB receptors open, but it modulates it so that when other compounds bind to it, for instance, THC, it changes the effect. It also has, and this is probably Joe White helped you as an analgesic, it also binds or has some kind of interaction with what's called the NMDA glutamatergic receptor. Those receptors are mainly found, or one of the key areas where they are found in terms of pain transmission is the spinal dorsal horn. And we know that it has a big role to play in pain. So if something influences that, then it will reduce pain, which is coincidentally also the main binding site of ketamine. And as we all know, ketamine is also beside its very strange kind of psychoactive effects, is also a analgesic, right? So that's why I think it probably helped you with the pain because of its influence there. But its real most interesting interaction, I find, and a lot of researchers would agree with me, is that a specific serotonin receptor of which it is agonist. This receptor is called the 5-HT1A receptor. Most of us in the psychedelic realm are probably familiar with the 5-HT2A receptor. This is the one, of course, psilocybin binds to, DMT binds to, LSD binds to. So a kind of sister receptor of that. And this is what researchers believe is responsible for CBD's ability to be an anxiolytic, in other words, reduce anxiety, and as an antidepressive. It's basically the receptor they think it goes to make you feel good. And it's also believed that it's this interaction that leads to a reduction in cravings when a person is withdrawing from opiates. There's a very it's interesting. A lot of this research kind of started in the 70s with a potentiation too, and then it just died off. I think once the whole Controlled Substances Act really took hold, and then once the whole Reagan Let's Say No era, there was, let's call it the dark ages of cannabinoid research, and then it slowly started in the early 90s again. But there's a lot of research that shows that specifically, so we have to differentiate between cravings. When we're testing it in rats, we'll do one of two things. Either we'll, provide them with the classic experiment, which we think of is like, it has a little water bottle and a lever, and the drug is right there, and how much is it pushing the lever? And it obviously shows that it's pushing the lever a lot more than the plain water bottle. Therefore, it's seeking drugs. So this is a way of measuring how is it craving the drug while the drug is actually present. Just also as a prelude, I'm not an addiction biologist by any means, so I could be butchering something here, quite possibly. So I just wanted to have a little preamble in case somebody with a PhD in addiction biology and pharmacology is listening to this and saying like, what the F is this guy talking about? So that's a way of seeking drugs, seeking behavior when it's not there. Then there's this other thing. It's called CPP, or conditioned place preference, which I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of it, but it's actually quite simple. And it's just where you kind of put a rat into a cage. The cage is split in two parts. On the one part, you give it the drug, and in the other part, you give it the placebo. And then you reintroduce the rat to that space later without the drug, and then you see, is it spending more time in the place where the drug was or the place the drug wasn't, or is it about equal time? And so they say if you reintroduce it and it's kind of just hanging around in that area where you gave it the drug, that obviously means that you kind of condition it and it's seeking the drug. It represents cravings. And so they showed that in the second case, this is supposed to be representative of a case where you're seeking drugs, but in the absence of the actual drug. Where the first one, they had access to the drug. The second one, they're looking for the drug, but the drug's not really there. So in the case of the second one, that was completely normalized when they used CBD. In other words, without CBD, drugs for opiates, specifically for morphine and heroin, which are the two opiates that they tested with, the rats would spend a lot of time there, a significant amount more than in the non-drug area. And then when they co-administered CBD at pretty high doses, I must say, the doses I saw were about 20 milligrams per kilogram. So which would probably translate, let's say, the average individual of 60 kilogram. That's like, 1.2 gram of pure CBD, which is quite a lot. But it completely reversed it. In other words, there was no more significant difference in the amount of time that rats spent in the time in the area where it had received the drug previously, as compared to the area where it just received placebo previously. And, there's a lot of negative side effects or negative experiences an individual will go through when he detoxes from a drug, whether that's cocaine or amphetamines or opiates. And but the one that's thought to most, consistently or reliably trigger relapse are cravings, because the actual physical withdrawal that you're going to go to, the cold sweats and the restlessness and the diarrhea, that's going to last like a week or two. And a lot of people, if they really want to stop, man, it really sucks. But like as Dr. Collahar Jr. said, it's not really worse than having a really bad flu. But the main thing is kind of the emotional turmoil that lingers for months, if not years afterwards, where it's that kind of craving for the drug. So if CBD could be used to reduce that craving, I'm sure it could have major potential as reducing relapse rates.
That's really interesting. So almost theoretically, a couple days after using, you could do a heavy dose of CBD or something and then go through the whole detox process and then maybe redose with CBD, and maybe the severity of that detox period, the 2-week period, might be substantially less painful.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
That would be a really interesting trial.
Another thing that's I actually forgot to mention this, but what makes it even, more pronounced is that, and by the way, this exists in no other drug that's used for this purposes. When they administered to rats, the effect would last 2 weeks after it was administered. And this has actually been done in humans already too, where it had the same effect. It was granted again a small sample size as we're usually dealing with when we're using with these compounds, but they tested it a week after, and the effects persisted for a week after that they were administered. So let's say you take oral CBD, a pretty high dose, which isn't really much of a big deal, because it's not going to have, it lacks hedonic properties and it lacks psychoactivity. So you can take, let's say, a pill, cannabinoid pill once a week, and it would, just dramatically reduce perhaps the right word would be the psychological turmoil that you go to that before could have been a precipitating event leading to a relapse.
That's really interesting. So are you talking specifically about CBD, or is it, mixed down with THC? Because, CBD is legal in the States to get. People can go to order CBD oil and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, the research, I'm always kind of, really like the idea of, what Dr. Raphael Mechoulam coined as the entourage effect. So I'm a fan of using a whole plant extract usually. The research here has been done with pure CBD, and I would probably also advise it because let's say you took something with a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you take 1.2 grams of CBD, that means you're also going to take 1.2 grams of THC, a standard dose. So that's 1,200 milligrams, a standard dose that gets you high. Let's say that's like 20 milligrams. So that is what Terence McKenna would call a heroic dose of THC, pretty much, So I wouldn't really advise anybody to take that much.
You can survive it. It might not be enjoyable. I have a friend he was on that TV show High Profits, CNN did, and his quote was, I tried to overdose on pot once. All I did was sleep for 18 hours, and it was like 1,300 milligrams or something. So about that territory. But, he's a highly conditioned pro, so I don't know what that would do to a grandmother, first time user.
I think if a person doesn't have any let's say bearings and know what they're getting themselves into and experience that, it would certainly, I don't believe I've ever taken that much. I've definitely taken too much when the classic edibles mistake of not waiting long enough.
Yep.
And it's pretty unpleasant. It's pretty unpleasant, and the thing is, it takes a long time to wear off.
Yeah.
So you really have to sit it out. And if we're talking about the contextual application of assisting people that are already, going through the turmoil of, getting off opiates, I wouldn't necessarily want to exacerbate by adding that onto their ordeal.
At that kind of dose, it really is coming into the realm of psychedelics more so than like normal dosing structures. So it's...
Yeah. Well, I think it has to do with the dose, Joe, but it's also because, it's also classically when we talk about edibles, and the main reason is that when you consume it orally, any drug that you consume orally actually goes through a phenomenon called first pass metabolism, because all other routes of administration, whether you smoke it or transdermal patch, The drug goes directly into your bloodstream. When you eat it, it goes from the GI tract into the hepatic portal vein, goes straight through the liver before it becomes available in the blood plasma. Once it starts binding to your CB receptors and you've eaten it, it's not really delta 9 THC anymore. It's something called 11-hydroxy THC, which is supposedly a much more psychoactive compound. So I feel not only is it because oral consumption allows you to get just net more THC into your bloodstream, but it's also it's a different beast. It's a different compound. So I think it's probably a combination of the two factors that, yes, certainly can lead to something that's more akin to a psychedelic than just like a stoner high.
Do you know if anybody's working on that particular compound? You called it 11-hydroxy THC. Like different delivery methods, like you light it and with heat it turns into 11 or anything like that. You have the precursor in the joint, and then it's an interesting concept. I just thought of that right now.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I don't know, Joe, to be honest. I know
I'll get right on
if you had to consume it orally, my guess would be it would just turn into the next metabolite, which is 11-carboxy THC, which is mostly inactive. And that's basically the form your body wants to turn it ultimately. Well, I lie. It wants to turn it into 11-carboxy THC, and then it wants to add a glucuronide molecule to it. And by that point, it's not binding to anything anymore, and your body's able to get rid of it, basically. So I don't know, that would definitely be a very interesting question for somebody to kind of have a look at. What would be the kind of decarboxylating effect due to pyrolysis,
Yeah. To all you organic chemists out there, you are welcome. So, and I'd like to try it. So is there anything major you want to get into regarding cannabis right now? Like, where can people check out your company before we jump into more psychedelic stuff?
Sure. Well, as I communicated to you guys, right now, what I've really been working on the past few weeks is just the copy for the website. So our website is not up yet. Our website will be up next week or the week after. So people are more than welcome to take it down and have a look. I'm also really going to be putting a huge emphasis on writing a lot of informative blog articles. I'm kind of taking a page from Gary Vaynerchuk's book and Seth Godin's book, who are the people that kind of inspired my idea of marketing. And our whole concept is this: hey, instead of spending money on advertisements to try and manipulate people into buying our product, why don't we use that resources and create awesome content that would add value to the greater community, give that away for free, and then if people somehow then feel more aligned towards our brand because of that, then I feel that's kind of a more honest way or integral way to go about it. So I'm spending a lot of time. I've probably written at least 20 articles already. So we'll be releasing something every week. The first series will feature specifically neuropathic pain, cannabis and neuropathic pain. And then we're going to move on to a very extensive series covering a lot of the things I spoke about today about the interaction between cannabis and opiates. So the website is Indeeva, that's INDEEVA.ca.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool way to go about it. Really just delivering a ton of content that's really helpful, and people will remember you for sure. I want to return that favor.
For sure, man. It's also just about creating a greater brand, which is going to be, it's going to last because it means something to people, It was so strange. I knew this part was coming when I decided to build a company, but I always used to kind of think about advertising and marketing. Like when I thought about advertising and marketing, the first thing that always came to mind was that one Bill Hicks bit. Where he's like, anybody here in advertising and marketing, kill yourself. Have you ever seen that one?
No.
Yeah, because Bill Hicks, sometimes he made these jokes where it was like, he wasn't really being funny. He was just like ranting. Yeah. And then people were kind of like, ha, 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 ha. He's like, no, I'm not fucking kidding. Go home, right? Like, kill yourself. So it's like, you are the devil or something like that. And I actually gave a lot of my friends were artistic people that, in the end of the day were to marketing. I actually gave them a lot of flack about it. And so this point came, and I'm very lucky that I discovered the work of, it's really a combination of Gary Vaynerchuk and Seth Godin that influenced me. And I then I realized like, holy shit, dude, you're creating this entity, like a company, and now you're shaping its personality, and you get to like decide how it interacts with the rest of the world. And it by no means has to be that way. Like this is paralleled by the way of pharmaceutical technology is being used by big pharma. Yeah, but it's not the technologies themselves that are being evil. It's the way they're being leveraged for control. Right. And in the same way, marketing and advertising, that could just be, hey, this is my personality, these are the channels I'm using to, share stuff about what we do and why we do it. And I'm very glad that, me and my business partner have this common vision of doing this. And, we're not trying to be some kind of, we're not trying to, tout some claims and then, to try to manipulate you because we're getting Snoop Dogg as our spokesperson or something like that. Which is, by the way, which tweet the biggest company in the sector is doing.
TWEED?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So they just released a series called Leafs by Snoop, and Snoop's 3 favorite strains, which you can get hand selected by the Snoop. I love Snoop Dogg, by the way. I don't want to put Snoop Dogg down. It's just that probably costs a lot of money. They have advertisements in Times Square, with Snoop Dogg. So yeah. I feel like I would have just made a lot of awesome content and given it away, but different strategies.
I'm really excited about the. I never thought I would be excited about this, but Martha Stewart has a new TV show with Snoop Dogg coming out, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, sure, man.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about ayahuasca. You are actually the first guest we've had on the show, I believe, who spent a substantial amount of time at a retreat center based around ayahuasca, located in Peru. Piatiti Institute. So I really appreciate ayahuasca. I think it's a really valuable thing. I wish it would become more available, maybe a little more safe somehow, maybe through research. It sounds like Dennis McKenna's working on that. What is your general impression of this whole ayahuasca tourism thing? Is it mostly beneficial? Is it really detrimental to Peru and the Amazon basin? Or what are your general thoughts on it?
Well, it's
okay if it's conflicted.
It's absolutely conflicted. Right. I always approach these kind of questions, and I'm probably copying this from Joe Rogan. Sure. It's a Joe Roganism, but it's like, it's not black or white, but it's nuanced shades of gray, and I definitely feel that way about it ultimately. But I would say if, that's kind of a cop-out. If I had to give an answer, Joe, I definitely believe it's a good thing. There's no scenario which I can really think of where there wouldn't be some collateral damage in this medicine exiting the jungle and reaching a broader audience, And I feel like what we're facing more than anything on planet Earth right now is not a political or a legal or economic or ecological crisis, but a spiritual crisis, because that's underlying all of it. And that is why, though I am involved in a cannabis company right now, and though I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to bring this medicine to more people for more healing, I feel ultimately my life is going to go in that direction, because I can really not say that I believe in anything else's ability more to help humanity, right? Not that I want to make it clear, I don't think it's a solution. I don't think everyone's going to drink ayahuasca and everyone's going to become enlightened and we're going to live in a ecological utopia. But I would say I do not believe in anything more its ability to assist mankind with the things we are grappling with right now than ayahuasca. And the reason I say that is because of the effect psychedelics, but ayahuasca too, the effect that I've had in my life, So it's something I believe in because it changed me, for the better, for sure. And I want to do whatever I can to assist the process of helping other people connect with it in a safe and responsible way too. so while this is going on, and I would be very sorry for, native people that, get the shorter end of the stick while this is happening. I think we just have to be really conscious and present throughout the process and make sure that we mitigate that as much as we can, but also accept that ultimately I feel it's her as in the spirit of ayahuasca. I think it's her decision. I think she's deciding that it's time for her to, grow and wrap the vine around the world right now and share her message, which the message is, wake up, monkeys. You guys are killing the planet.
Coming from a permaculture background, would you have any concern of like over harvesting the plant or anything along that lines of like maybe too much?
Yeah, well, that certainly exists. I'd be very interested. I definitely came with kind of a natural versus synthetic bias, and it's still, I would lie if I say it's completely gone, but, I'm a little bit more open towards, I wonder how it would be to take what they refer to as pharmahuasca, so a DMT and an MAO inhibitor that were created in a lab, and whether or not that could potentially be used to assist people and have some of the same effects at least, and then therefore, lessen the demand for the naturally grown vine. But it is a vine that takes a long time to grow. I think the only other psychedelic plant that takes longer is iboga, which we know also have some serious problems in recent years because of that. But then I feel it's again, perhaps, the onus of somebody to feel inspired and start some kind of venture to do something like that. When I was at Paititi, some days we would be inspired, and when we had bags of ayahuasca, they would just start kind of sprouting by themselves. And often days after a ceremony, I would just take a wheelbarrow and I would just walk everywhere in the jungle and plant. I think in total I probably planted a few hundred of them. So I at least made sure that I gave back. And I think it's definitely something that if anybody is operating a commercial center within Peru and you are harvesting substantial amounts of ayahuasca, I feel it's definitely something you should reinvest in, is using some of the funds you're getting from people coming to your center to make sure there's enough of this medicine for the future too.
Absolutely. Are you aware of anybody successfully growing the plant in greenhouses or, anywhere outside of Peru, Colombia, or Hawaii?
Well, my only other thing that came to mind was Botanical Dimensions, it turns its place in Hawaii. To be truthful, Joe, I have not. In principle, it should be possible to grow it in a greenhouse, but I've never heard of anyone doing that.
Yeah, that would be an interesting venture. I think it's worth doing. Yeah. And I'm really curious about the synthetic concept too. It would be really cool to have some sort of trial group of 100 people with all of their, written and spoken kind of discussions about it before and after. To have that data set would be really informative.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm very open towards it. I know mostly the dichotomy between what's natural and what's not natural. It's just a construct. It's a linguistic construct that exists in the minds of humans and really nowhere else. Plastic is nature too. Cancer is nature too. Everything is nature. But so I'm very open towards it, but I have, just based on my experiences, definitely had more profound and I would say deeper kind of dimensional experiences. I haven't had pharmahuasca, as I mentioned, but I'm specifically referring to synthetic mescaline and the 2Cs versus San Pedro, which is a medicine that's very close to my heart too. I've definitely had much better and richer experiences with that. But is that because it is the medicine itself, or is that because there still exists a bias within my mind that I come armed with, that exists within my subconscious mind when I take these, and therefore that influences the experience? I don't know, but I definitely stay open towards it, you know.
Yeah. One thing that comes to my mind, I remember reading or hearing a talk when Hoffman ended up synthesizing psilocybin and then bringing it back to Mexico and gave it to Maria Sabina. And she said, oh, yeah, this is great. You know, we can use this like when the mushrooms aren't in season, but it's lost its spirit. So
that's, to be honest, how, and that, I don't know if I heard that specific story too, but that's kind of what I said after I experimented with the synthetic stuff. It was like, you know, I have powerful visions, all that stuff, but it just felt like it's kind of soulless, you know, which actually reminds me too that in Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, Dennis McKenna, he says he smoked DMT again for the first time in a long time for preparation for the book. And I don't know if you guys know, but Dennis, he does some serious work with ayahuasca too. Mm-hmm. And he said he definitely went somewhere. It was like, I think he described it as kind of as a carnival or like an amusement park, but it was like empty.
Yeah.
The lights were on and the rides were on, but nobody else was there. It was just him there, which I find, you know, kind of resonating with what we're communicating here is maybe my feeling is these compounds alter your consciousness, which allows you probably access to a different realm. But when you use the plant, there is a guide going with you to that realm. Mm-hmm. And so when you take mescaline, synthetic mescaline, you go to, you know, the mescaline reality, but you're there by yourself. Mm-hmm. And when you take, you know, peyote or San Pedro, you also go to mescaline reality. But now you have a incredibly wise teacher along with you to help you just navigate it, because it's, of course, a very, very complex experience for a human being to have a strong psychedelic experience, you know.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of curious to hear maybe what your thoughts are about the like cannabis. Like, does that working with cannabis in like this medical realm, but also there are people that talk about like the spirit of cannabis and the whole plant. I mean, I guess we're kind of talking about the same thing with the like psychedelics, but you know, I guess cannabis has more of this medical view nowadays.
Yeah. Well, I have, you know, an incredible belief in the therapeutic powers of cannabis, you know, as I think it's a kind of preamble to what I'm going to say right now. I do really believe in a very strong interconnection of the mind and body, views like promulgated by, for instance, Dr. Gabor Mate. And so I feel like psychedelics are able to heal a lot of times because they're able to work on the psyche, and whether it's, you know, repressed emotions or energies and releasing that from the subconscious mind, which a lot of times these repressed energies manifest as diseases in the body, help you to alleviate that. Man, it's so hard for me to say this because I don't want to sound like I'm kind of putting cannabis down or saying like it's just different to me. I don't necessarily see it doing such deep work on the subconscious, but more having direct physical effects, you know, on the body itself. Maybe that's because I've studied, you know, the physiological of cannabis much more than I have the psychedelics. But I think also, man, it really differs from person to person. Because I know people, and it's funny, it's often girls, like women, that cannabis is incredibly powerful to them. And I would take a similar edible dose and hardly feel anything. And I would have friends that I've given some to where they would have incredibly, what they would call, you know, kind of transcendental experiences with cannabis. I feel it's a feminine spirit too. Mm. I don't know if that means it's not connecting with me that way for some reason. But if I have to be 100% honest too, I really love cannabis, but I have had somewhat of an abusive relationship with it in the past. Mm-hmm. I loved it too much for too many years, basically. Right. So I don't know if that has somehow influenced its potential for connecting me with higher realms. You know, but certainly if we look at ancient cultures like the how do you call them, the sadhus and stuff, and many other cultures, you know, the Mesopotamians had 3 different names for cannabis. The one I think is Ganzi Ganu, which was talking about its spiritual significance to them too. There was a tomb found in China where a person was adorned with cannabis plants around them, again signifying it was most likely a religious sacrament. So from my own personal experience, I haven't necessarily connected to what could be considered a psychoactive nature of cannabis, but I do believe it exists, certainly.
There's people in Colorado, probably elsewhere too, working with cannabis in kind of a legal way now, similar to how we structure our breathwork sessions. But, you're laying down, eyes closed. They're working the room in some way. It's a group called Medicinal Mindfulness out of Boulder, who I think is doing a bunch of it. And I know Kanjasana, kind of like a yoga group out of Durango, Colorado. They're doing similar work too. And I'll report back if I ever get the opportunity to try it or talk to some folks who've tried it, because it's really an interesting concept.
I think, I've definitely looked for that. Is like, traditional ceremonies of cannabis that exist. I haven't been able to find the information, but I would be very interested in doing something like that too. And I wonder if that could potentially be something that could kind of heal my relationship with cannabis and allow it to, be more of a kind of spiritual ally in my life. Mm-hmm. I do know what you're talking about. Actually, there's a guy called Hamilton Souther who used to be an ayahuasquero. He's an American. He had a retreat center called the Blue Morpho. Mm-hmm. There was a documentary about him, actually. I think it was called Metamorphosis. And around about the time I left Peru, he actually moved to California and he started what's called, I believe it's called the 420 Blue Morpho Club. And I think he does similar stuff. I haven't really checked that out, but it's about, using it in a conscious way, and maybe if you take cannabis and you have an intention, if you treat it with the same kind of respect as you would other plant medicine, and, you are present, there's no distractions, you go with the intention, perhaps you could tap into that, certainly. But, I'm so conditioned to, watch smoking a joint and watching a documentary. So, I'm obviously too distracted to tap into any more of its, subtle messages or something when I'm doing something like that.
Yeah, the drug is so ubiquitous these days that it's hard to feel like it's special anymore.
Yeah, man.
And that's part of the problem.
Again, I don't want to sound too critical. To each his own. I'm really glad it's not illegal, and we've gone past the whole reefer madness. But when I see scenes from the Cannabis Cup and just these people dabbing super hard, and it's like, wow, that's not for me, man.
Yeah, a little too intense.
So intense, man. Wow.
Yeah, the reason why I asked it when we were talking about spirit stuff, I had a friend that was studying with the curandero in Peru, and I guess the curandero said that you should stop smoking cannabis, and the spirit doesn't like to be burnt, and they suggested that you should drink it, as in the Hindu culture would drink bhang, and so infuse it in the milk and then kind of have that ceremonial stay up all night dance with it and whatnot. So I guess that's just kind of why I asked. It just kind of popped in my mind when we were talking about spirit and plants.
Yeah, sure, Kyle. I think there's a lot of potential and a lot to be explored there. I just haven't done it personally, but I definitely believe that dimension does exist with this plant.
Yeah, this might be a little off topic, but I'm curious. Do you know anything about cacao? Raw chocolate? Yeah. And being that, you're talking about synergist with opiates. I was wondering if you knew any, if it's cannabis and cacao synergist.
Yeah, it actually, there's if we had to define what is a cannabinoid, then first of all, we have to say, well, there's three types of cannabinoids. There are the endocannabinoids, which are produced in our body. There are synthetic cannabinoids, which are either synthesized based on something like THC or then purely novel compounds. A very famous one is called HU210. They were really useful research tools for a long time. And then, of course, I'm sure you guys now have heard of things like K2 and spice. People have started abusing them, and they seem to cause a lot of trouble. And then, we get the phytocannabinoids, which are THC and CBD. What is the definition of a cannabinoid? Well, the cannabinoid defined is something that influences the cannabinoid system. So, in other words, it exerts some kind of influence on the CB receptors. What if that really is the definition? Then it's actually there are compounds that should be considered cannabinoids present in other plants too. Some of these plants, like the three most prominent examples that always come to mind, are turmeric, echinacea, and cacao too. They're actually just chemically so different, and because they don't necessarily exert their primary effect on the cannabinoid receptors, we actually don't call them cannabinoids. We call them cannabinomimetics. So like they imitate the effects of cannabinoids or something like that. And yeah, cacao is definitely a very synergistic plant with cannabis. But I almost feel like it's like the mother synergist. It's first of all, it's pharmacologically speaking, an incredibly rich and diverse plant. It has, I'm not an expert by any means on the pharmacology of it, but I know it has like thousands or more than 1,000 active compounds. And, I'm sure you've heard of, taking psilocybin mushrooms and cacao together. It seems to be quite ubiquitous in terms of combining it with others. And then, of course, something that's gotten quite popular in recent years too is just the cacao ceremony itself, which is where people would come together again with the intention in a kind of conscious container and take a very high dose of cacao and then, work. I don't think it necessarily has very strong psychoactive effects to me necessarily, but it definitely works on emotions. And to me personally, just because of my history, that's something that's incredibly beneficial to me. It's just connecting with my heart more because I'm an incredibly mind-oriented person, and I almost need a little helper to just help me feel things that are going on there sometimes.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks. Yeah. Because I've worked with cacao a bunch in the past, and I figured since you're diverse in the plant world, I figured I'd ask.
Yeah, there's a very interesting paper called "Cannabinoids Beyond the Cannabis Plant. Do They Exist?" I don't know if that was verbatimly correct. Vincent De Marzo is one of the authors, very famous cannabinoid researcher from Italy. So if anyone wanted to learn more about that, there are other plants too that also have compounds that would, augment the effects of cannabis when co-administered.
Super interesting.
So what's the current legal climate like in Canada? I know that there's talk of legalizing recreational use, or maybe it's already happening in the liquor stores.
Yeah, so Canada had their first kind of, let's say, version 1 of a medicinal system. I think it came 2001 or 2002. But that was basically like you're going to grow yourself or there's a compassion club. And then with the conservative government, they kind of said that, well, this just opens the door for people to grow too many at home and it feeds the black market. And we're getting a lot of houses that are being converted in grow-ups and fires and theft and burglary. They're ruining suburban neighborhoods, stuff like that. So the conservative government overhauled it on the 1st of April 2014 and created what was called the NMPR. This basically created the first, in my mind, the first medicinal cannabis system in the world where they said, hey, this is fully legal and we're going to allow companies to apply and get a license to grow, but we're going to treat you like a pharmaceutical company. So your building needs to be up to the same standards in terms of, hygiene, quality assurance, quality control, all those things. We're going to do tests on every single batch. We're going to look at microbial load. We're going to look at heavy metal. We're going to look at pesticides. You can't use any pesticides, etc. With this system, they created an incredibly high barrier to entry. The application process is also incredibly long. It takes, the average estimate is to actually be a grower, you need approximately $10 million in capital. That would be the minimum to build the kind of operating facility that you require. So then, of course, okay, so this came online. They sold bud, but the bud is, let's say, a minimum of $6 up to $12. Then a group of patients went to the Supreme Court in BC, and they said, well, they're denying us right to medicine, us access to medicine, because I can grow it at home for $1 a gram, and now they're forcing me to pay $8 a gram. And then it was interesting. I think the Harper government, the Conservative government, were in the Supreme Court of Canada like 6 times, and they lost every single time. So they lost. The Supreme Court gave them a 1-year grace period to overhaul the laws to also allow for home growing. This came online about the 23rd of August, I believe was the date of this year. So now we have kind of a hybrid of the old and the new system. We still have the companies that are growing. Some of the biggest companies, cannabis growing companies in the world now, undoubtedly. And then we have the ability for people to grow at home too, which I feel is 100% the right move, how it should be. And so we have, a pretty well-established medicinal system. We don't have any dispensaries. You can't buy it anywhere. You need a prescription from your doctor, and then you contact the company, and they send it to you via Canada Post. And then we had our election about 1 year ago, and then one of the main tenets which the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau, ran was a promise to make recreational cannabis legal. This was basically because he said that 2 main things. Number 1, it's giving money to the black market, to criminal gangs. And number 2, people always say, like, if you make it legal, what about the children? Well, his opinion is if in a legal market, it's easier for kids to get it than in an illegal market, it's easier for them to get it than legal, because drug dealers don't ask for ID. And if we can control it and tax it and make sure the quality is good and then there's no adulterants, etc., that will actually be a much safer system for society. So that's what they promised. There's been different things that have happened gradually in the past year. Like, for instance, they appointed a head. He was the previous police chief of Toronto to head a task force to do this. Jane Philpott. Her surname is Philpott, and she went to the UN, the Ungas Convention, on 420, and basically told the UN, because the big problem is to do this, you actually have to violate 3 UN treaties. And she basically told the UN that Canada's allegiance lies more towards its own citizens than it does towards your treaties. So either you can change the treaties, or we're just going to go and do it in any case. Which I believe Colombia and Mexico, or I may be wrong. I know it's Colombia and maybe, I don't know, another country also basically told the UN that they're on the trajectory to do the same thing. They said it would be implemented next year in April. So far, there's just like a little bit of news seeping through the media periodically. Like I heard about a week ago that Shoppers Drug Market, which is like, I guess, what is your like big pharmacy chain store? Walgreens or what?
We have a Walgreens, CVS,
Rite Aid.
Yes. So it's basically that. So they approached the government to be the distributor. I know various, because in Canada, really, I suppose it's the same in the States, but it's also really by province case. So some of the liquor, so in Quebec, hard alcohol and wine is only sold through stores called the SAQ, which are basically the government, and it's like that with most provinces. They've kind of applied to be sold, but then people say, well, it's not really appropriate selling recreational cannabis next to alcohol because you really don't want to combine the two. They're really bad to combine with one another, pharmacologically speaking. I think ultimately the best would be taking a page from the Colorado book, having storefronts, having dispensaries, having place that's committed towards that, where people that are working, that are knowledgeable on the subject, can make the right recommendations to people. So people can use drugs in an educated manner. People have always used drugs. People use drugs. People will always continue to use drugs. The best thing we can really do is be as educated as we can about using that drugs. And I feel like the system that would best support that outcome would be having something like that Colorado has, dispensaries. And apparently there was some connection with officials from Colorado and kind of cross-pollination of ideas and regulations. So I think the country has certainly studied it. Right now, nothing is sure whether it is going to be in April of next year, whether it's going to be pharmacies, it's going to remain mail order, whether it's going to be liquor stores, or whether it's going to be dispensaries. It's really anybody's guess at this point.
I have to say, I really enjoyed the dispensary model. I wish it was maybe a little less regulated, but it's pretty fine for what we're getting right now.
Okay. Why do you say that? You wish it was more loosely regulated?
Less, more deregulated in terms of like on the recreational market, an edible package, I believe, needs to be 100 milligrams or less. Say for example, there was a manufacturing mistake and you had 105 milligrams. That would be illegal to sell in the recreational market. Why do that? There's no real reason. They're worried about maybe tourists having an overdose like experience, just like we were talking about. You ate too much. Maybe you should have eaten less. The testing is really substantial in the recreational market. They actually spend a lot more money testing the product than they do in the medical market. The medical market, they don't require as much testing. And as a result, the price of the product is a lot cheaper. And the medical customers also get away without very much sales tax. I don't know exactly which sales taxes they're skipping, but usually they can sidestep that.
But so there's a dispensary that's a medical only dispensary and one that's a recreational only dispensary?
Yeah, which is interesting. I don't mind it. My friends who have medical cards save a lot of money. I personally don't come anywhere close to using enough to make that investment in a medical card worth it. So, because you have to re-up it annually, I think.
Yeah. Look, I think it's good that we are, implementing some regulations and definitely mitigate any potential negative side effects and damage. Listen, if hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are going to be using a compound as this, again, there is going to be some collateral damage, but we need to be realistic and we need to look at what is the comparative harm that cannabis presents to the individual and society at large compared to alcohol or tobacco or legal opiates, and or just aspirin. The amount of people that would die from ulcers or intestinal bleeding from non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are it just completely dwarfs cannabis. So I'm glad we are having some kind of structure, and it's not a complete free for all, but it does seem to me sometimes like it's a little overreach, which may just in the beginning be kind of a good thing because, we're still going to find our sweet spot, I think, in the years and the decades to come. And I think let's rather be overcautious in the beginning than not be cautious at all and perhaps give the opponents some serious, ammunition to make a case for, undoing all of this, God forbid.
Right. Yeah, we don't really want President Trump to roll it back. So we'll find out. Yeah,
or Clinton, who's quote unquote short all the way. Apparently, it's what you said to the Xerox CEO. What an interesting election you guys have going on. So this is too off topic.
I'm going to be in Canada on election day, and I will be freaking out probably in my hotel room.
Oh, man.
I mean, I think it's a pretty foregone conclusion what's the result's going to be.
I hope so.
Just want to see what's the aftermath going to be if you have President Clinton, where there's so many things skeletons and things that aren't just going to go away because she's president now, and what would that mean to a country?
I think it's like Richard Nixon. It's like Richard Nixon all over again, which it's better than other things. The new Stalin,
Yeah.
Well, anyway, before we get too political, I think we should wrap this up. So your website is Indeeva, INDEEVA.ca, and people can find the stuff you're writing there.
Yeah, we have a link to my blog there.
Cool.
And then hopefully I've been working kind of on the side too. Within a few months, I'm going to release a personal blog too, which is basically the idea is nucleated by David Nutt's book, Drugs Without the Hot Air. I just want to create a container for people to really have a repository of true scientific reflection of drugs and the dangers of drugs. So I'm hoping that it's going to be online before psychedelic science too.
Awesome.
Fantastic. And make sure you send us that link and we'll get it on this particular podcast post.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
And send it to all our people. Faan, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Kyle. I really enjoyed it, guys. And, have a great weekend.
You too. As well. Take care.
Good. Ciao, guys.